we are going to be going over how best, or at least in my opinion, how best to reduce your carbohydrate intake. Okay, so we're going to go over a few different factors on how we're going to do that, or how I would recommend doing that. Before we kind of get into that, I want to really preface that there's some real classic things that people do wrong when they first start trying to reduce carbohydrates. So I really want to make sure that we're going to address those things first beforehand, before we kind of get too deep. So if you are just jumping on, place a comment down below. I'd love to know who's on here. I've got the camera actually flicked around the other way, so I can't see who is on, so that you guys can actually read this. So otherwise, if you can hear me now, put a comment down. Where are you watching from? And out of interest, what are your goals at the moment? Is it either to build endurance, or is it a weight loss goals? Because those are the two niches that we look after. So if you are falling into one of those categories, put a comment down and let me know, okay? So up the top here, like I said, today we're going to go over carbohydrate, or at least reducing carbohydrates, okay? Up the top here, we've got C, F, and P, carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, okay? So the conversation, as we said, is going to be based around here, which is decreasing the amount of total carbohydrates that you're consuming, okay? So that's obviously what we're going to go over today. Then this one here is fats. I'm going to give some recommendations on that just quickly, okay? Is while we're going to be talking about the carbohydrates, I just want to make it clear that you don't want to be just trying to eat as much fat as you possibly can, or making a whole bunch of fat bombs and all this ridiculously refined lipid type meals or snacks to try and go low carbohydrate. This is where a lot of people go wrong. At the end of the day, fat or carbohydrates, they are both energy substrates, okay? It is all about understanding why we would want to reduce the carbohydrates, or at least what's the advantage of doing it. My experience, there's a lot of advantages. In some of our clients, there's a lot of advantages to doing that. However, again, everyone's a little bit unique. Everyone needs a tailored approach. So depending on what the person's goal is or how they like to live their life, obviously it will depend on how low or what we do with the carbohydrates, okay? So when we look at reducing the carbohydrates, do not immediately think that you need to upregulate the amount of fat that you're eating, right? If you've ever sat there and told yourself where you've tried to like go on a low carbohydrate diet and you're like, maybe I just need to eat more fat. That usually doesn't end up being the case. And a lot of people that I work with and all of our clients who have become fat adapted, keto adapted, or just genuinely healthier with moderated carbohydrates, they feel better, a bit more sustained energy. You don't have to be chasing massive amounts of fat. That's really, really important. So think about fat in general. Obviously, it's very, very energy dense. You need to be super duper careful with it, because if you're not fat adapted, you're really not going to have those signals to tell you that you've had enough, okay? People can get the runs and all this sort of disgusting type things, okay? So that's what I want to preface around the fat. So if you are going to attempt to reduce your carbohydrates, you do not want to intently, absolutely 100% chase, like just guzzling down extra fat to try and be fat adapted or whatever you think that you're doing with that, okay? So that's a big no-no. The other side is to reduce ISO, which is just your industrial seed oils. So when you are consuming fat, you want to make sure it's the right fat. Third one is the protein. So we've gone carbs, which is what we'll talk about in a bit. Fats, I'll try to give you a little bit around that. Essential fatty acids obviously being important. Then your protein. Now P wants to be increased, your essential amino acids. Why I would put a focus around increasing your protein is place a priority around it, okay? Very, very important. Your building block of body, building block of your cells, it's super duper important that we don't have chronically low protein. If you have chronically low protein, it's gonna have a whole bunch of disastrous effects, which we won't go into this video, okay? So let's get into the why, like just quickly why, okay? So as you can see here, what I've got broken down, it probably doesn't make any sense, but if you continue to watch the video, you guys will soon understand exactly what I'm talking about with all these different letters, okay? If you can't read my writing, I do apologize. So why, okay? Number one is we can go from having chronic hunger, cravings and things like that to reduce hunger, to then obviously reduced meals or reduced amount of food, okay? Which is then obviously going to inevitably go into something like weight loss. So if you're keen on weight loss and you would like things to be feeling like a little bit more effortlessly, Again, depending on the person, depending on their lifestyle, depending on their stress factors and all those sorts of things, it can be an awesome tool just for the very basics weight loss, okay? Awesome tool for that. Second one is fat or keto adapted. Now I'm talking about endurance specific. So if you're out there doing even 5Ks, 10Ks, 21Ks, or ridiculous marathons and above, becoming very fuel efficient, okay? What I mean by fuel efficient is you can use glycogen and you can use your fat stores, is a significant benefit to you when you're going out there for long periods of time. If you have the ability to burn fat, okay, and that can come down to what sort of macronutrient foods that you are eating, okay. When you are out there, you have run less risk of bonking, less risk of hitting the wall, less risk of having a blood sugar low. All those sorts of things are very, very important when we talk about sustainable endurance, which is basically what endurance is all about, right? How fast can you go without slowing down, really, or without breaking down? And a lot of it comes from the PE, which is your perceived effort. You think that your effort's really, really high, but a lot of it can come down to your energy fuels and your energy crisis, or whether you have one or you don't have one, okay? So if your body thinks that there's a bit of an energy crisis, meaning that there's not a lot of energy available, okay? If you're not fat adapted and the only thing that you've got is glycogen to utilize, you either need to rely heavily on a lot of calories, which is going to cause a lot of issues with digestive stress, or you're going to bonk and hit the wall and fall out, okay? So that's the second point. Third one is SE, stable energy throughout the day. So if you're someone who works relatively long hours, or even just works 9 to 5, okay? Reducing the carbohydrates, again, to what degree? Everyone's going to be really, really different, so I'm not going to sit here and give you a number. However, reducing your carbohydrates, if you're feeling like you have energy levels that kind of like go like a roller coaster throughout the day, one that used to ruin basically each of my day. I know Nicole went through exactly the same thing. We have a bunch of clients that also have experienced that as well, that kind of gone from this like yo-yo approach to energy throughout the day, and if they missed a meal then they become cranky, hangry, and all those sorts of things, to then obviously getting a bit more stable energy where you feel a bit more flatlined, right? So you might not be at 100% kind of buzzing, you might sit at 80% or 85% where you're just kind of humming and you're just like, no, I'm good, okay? Those are some real basic reasons as to why. Now let's get into the actual video, which is how I would recommend doing this, okay? So my recommendation is not to go like balls deep basically and go straight into it. I would actually take a bit more of a tailored approach. Okay, so that starts with point number one, is that you would want to take a look at your own diet. Now you can either do that through written form, you can log your food, you can take photos. There's numerous ways that you can do it, but I would take a look at what you're actually currently eating, okay, and assess where all your carbohydrates are coming from, and then slowly start to work from there, okay? So why I would say to start working from where you are is that, again, carbohydrate restriction, like to get these sorts of benefits, you don't just have to go into some keto diet or some ridiculous state like that, which you don't need to do, or majority of people don't need to do. Okay, you can actually get all of these sort of benefits, particularly these two. I mean, weight loss is really good, but there's numerous ways that you can do that. However, these two, like endurance performance and the ability to not bonk and your sustained energy throughout the day, I just think it's a huge advantage of being on a lower carbohydrate diet, okay? So tailored approach, start where you are, and I would actually slowly work your way from there, okay? So I'll give you some things that you would probably want to look at removing first over the next couple of minutes, but start from there. Where are you at? And slowly progress from there. You can jump. I mean, it's up to you however you do it, but you can jump from where you are. But in my experience, people don't sustain it. They hate it, and they don't actually learn where all of the basically junk food, refined carbohydrates were really coming from. And that's usually what's going to cause the insulin spike, to cause you to ineffectively not burn fat, okay? Which is what we're after. We're realistically after metabolic flexibility. We don't want to have our carbohydrates chronically so low that, you know, when you do have carbohydrates that you just can't deal with them. We also want to be a point where you're having a good balance between the two energies that you've got here, carbohydrates and fat, that you can use. So if you don't eat, you can burn fat. If you eat, you can also use the dietary energy very easily, okay? So tailored approach, it needs to start with where you're at. So log your food for a week or two, see where you're at, and see what sort of changes that you can make from what you're already seeing. Kind of go for the low-hanging fruit, okay? Number two is I would do it without CR, without caloric restriction, okay? So I wouldn't reduce carbohydrates and then also go down in your total energy or your total calories that you're consuming. So if you are going to log your food because you're doing this tailored approach and you're seeing how many calories that you're eating, if you do end up going through and adjusting your carbohydrates and you go through a severe caloric restriction, you're going to get it's going to be a really untasteful way of doing this, okay? So you're going to get a bunch of stress markers that are going to go up. Cortisol is going to go up because you can't control blood sugar levels as efficiently as you should. When you are fat adapted, you can, but if you're not fat adapted, otherwise you wouldn't be watching this, okay? I wouldn't recommend going through a caloric restriction or eating less, okay, straight away or immediately. I would actually try to compensate with keeping the calories relatively the same, and you're just looking to reduce, okay, these two things to start out with, okay? So restriction, okay, on your sugars. So let's talk about refined sugars, okay? So we're restricting refined sugars and refined lipids. So the lipids that I'm talking about, the fats, are these isos, industrial seed oils, canola oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil, all those sorts of things, all those high inflammatory oils. You're going to want to limit and or remove those. And obviously sugars is obviously going to cause its own problematics and own problem, especially if we're talking about hunger as well, if you have sort of cravings and issues, okay? So those are like your low-hanging fruit. So when you have done your tailored approach and you haven't actually just gone through a massive caloric restriction, because when you have weight loss, you're going to see massive benefits just from the weight loss, and it might not even be anything to do with carbohydrates, okay? Now, third one is what you should be reducing first. I would start with your refined carbohydrates and your refined lipids, and that is just junk food. So get rid of the junk food. So that's not me saying get rid of potato, get rid of sweet potatoes, zucchinis, and all your plants and all those sorts of things. I'm literally just saying get rid of the junk food for an extended period of time, or at least, you know, until you can start to experience what the sensations are of being fat adapted, which is the main benefit as to why you would limit carbohydrates, okay, so that you have sustained energy throughout the day. Now, my fourth one before I finish up here is actually test it, okay? So before you actually would really want to gun down like any severe weight loss, okay, is you want to test it. Now, if you're into endurance, well then you could test it with a long form run and seeing if your aerobic conditioning is actually improving. So if this is improving, if you reduce your carbohydrates and your fat oxidizing rates go upwards, your aerobic conditioning is also going to go up as well. So an MAF test is always going to be really good for that, maximum aerobic function test. If you don't know what that is, you can hit me up. However, the other way that you can test it is just don't eat for a day, or don't eat for 12 hours, or just choose a certain amount of time that you might think that's a little bit kind of crazy that you haven't done for a while, and don't eat. And if you feel controlled, if you feel like you've got stable energy, if you can have time away from food, it's probably a pretty good indicator that you are fat or keto adapted, which basically means that you can burn fat as fuel in the lack of presence of dietary energy. Okay, so that's how I would go about it. I wouldn't really go about it as in just going from whatever diet that you're on, which probably is the SAD diet, standard American diet, standard Australian diet, which is probably your daily intake of carbohydrates could be 40 to 60%, okay? I'm not recommending go down to a keto level or a really low level. I would see where you're at, okay, without caloric restriction, and then start to attack the kind of the big offenders, right? At the end of the day, you probably already know, refined food, refined carbohydrates, particularly in lipids, is not going to be a really good thing for you to do, okay? To start by removing those is going to be your best bet. Then test it, okay? Then once this happens, I would take it depends on how anal you want to be with tracking your food and things, but you can probably take a bit of a back seat, because if you're getting this, a reduced hunger, which means there's going to be reduced meal timing, which is also means there's going to be weight loss as well, okay? So that can happen organically. One thing that this will not happen, weight loss, if you just want to guzzle down your fat, okay? So if you're looking at restricting carbohydrates and you're sitting there and you're trying to focus on getting all this extra fat in, you're not going to lose any weight, okay? It's still energy at the end of the day. It's your energy substrate, fat or carbohydrates. So prioritize protein, obviously limit carbohydrates to a tailored degree, and then fill with fat to satiety. Don't go chasing and guzzling down fat. That's the last thing that you're going to want to do, okay? Guys, hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment down. I'm sorry that I couldn't actually communicate with you guys today. Otherwise, if you have any questions, just let me know. If you're after a conversation, if you'd like to either improve your weight loss results and or endurance training without needing to flog yourself for the gym all the time, hit me up. That's what I do. Otherwise, guys, I'll see you here next time. Thanks. Bye.